Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to participate at this important event. Allow me to begin by congratulating you on your choices of topics for this CSD 14. In having chosen to focus this particular session of the CSD on energy for sustainable development, looking also at the related issues of industrial development, air pollution and climate change, you've indeed chosen a very timely subject. Sustainable development must become a key driver of energy policy. Evidence of the environmental damage that our current energy policies are causing is mounting every day. The Arctic Climate Impact Assessment report has given us important indicators of the rate at which our climate is changing. The report notes that in the Arctic Sea, summer ice has decreased by nearly 30% in the past 50 years, in part due to global warming. Moreover, the rate at which we have been losing Arctic ice has accelerated by some 20% in the past 30 years. Global warming has now become the most serious environmental challenge of our century. Our energy policies have also taken their toll on human health, and this is not surprising, since most people are obliged to continue to live in the environment they pollute. Many of the world's biggest cities are now suffering from serious air pollution due to transportation and industrial development. High level of lead in the human bloodstream are only one of many of these consequences. Today, the global economy continues to be fossil fuel driven, relying mostly on oil, coal, and natural gas, and only sort of 15% of the world's primary energy supply is from renewables. According to the International Energy Agency, if existing patterns of economic development continue, the world's energy needs are likely to rise by almost 60% in 2030. How, then, do we intend to deal with this growing demand? It is clear that adjustments need to be brought to our energy policies. We need to meet our growing energy demand without putting either human health or the environment at risk. We must also deal with this very complex issue of energy security. In a world that is increasingly interdependent, countries are quite understandably concerned about the reliability of their energy supplies. And while none of these issues are easy to resolve, over the past week this forum has, I believe, raised awareness and generated ideas. Now, turning to trade, which is, as you may know, one of my favorite topics at the moment, it's undoubted that trade plays an important role in energy policy. Trade can bring about greater energy security for countries that are not themselves energy producers. It is also an extremely important source of revenue for energy exporters. It is said that trade flourishes at times of peace, but I would argue that orderly trade in energy can itself contribute to world peace. And while World Trade Organization rules have set the beginnings of an architecture to address the trade-related aspects of energy, these rules may need to evolve in future to address energy trade more comprehensively. The composition of the WTO's membership will be one of the determinants of how quickly this process comes about. Only recently, Saudi Arabia joined the WTO, bringing an important part of energy trade under the purview of the organization's multilateral rules. Several other energy producers are in line to exceed. Russia, Kazakhstan, Algeria, for example. Since 1990, developing countries have accounted for around 60% of world's annual fuel exports, and clothing is the only other sector where they have achieved such an important place. Although most developing countries export fuels to developed countries, trade among the developing world has been rising. And this is mainly due to increased demand in Asia, in particular China, Korea, and India. Most trade in energy take place at very low or sometimes non-existent duties, particularly in terms of developed countries' imports. But there are other barriers to trade in energy, such as export restrictions and quotas, and restrictions on transit. Such barriers will need to be addressed, albeit, of course, gradually. Of course, the transportation of goods, and we have more and more of that, involves the consumption of energy, whether in the course of maritime, road, or air transport. And for this reason, I believe it is vital for countries to internalize the negative environmental externalities that arise in the course of this process. The harm done to the environment must begin to feature as a cost in international trade transactions. In the Doha Round of trade negotiations, which we are presently negotiating, countries are seeking to open trade not only in goods, but also in services. And a number of countries have tabled offers on various kinds of energy services, such as distribution or pipeline transportation. Some of these offers have been made possible by the gradual opening of the energy sector that has taken place at country level, and thanks to the shrinking of state monopolies. Thus, the energy sector is increasingly being subjected to greater competition, which is, I believe, a welcome development, which has now found its reflection in our negotiations in WTO. In a world where nearly 2.5 billion people still rely on traditional biomass, wood and agricultural residues for cooking and heating in their homes, and where 1.5 billion do not have access to electricity, energy services can play a vital role. And enhancing access to such services would make a direct contribution to the fulfillment of the Millennium Development Goals. And I take this opportunity to ask all countries to engage in these negotiations and to step up existing offers. I also take this opportunity to emphasize that the opening of services market is not synonymous to the deregulation of those markets. Countries are completely within their rights under the WTO to continue to regulate their services sector, provided, of course, they do so in a non-discriminatory manner. Having spoken about the market opening potential of the Doha Round in energy, let me turn now to its sustainable development dimension. Negotiations on the trade liberalization of environmental goods and services, as well as on the relationship between World Trade Organization rules and multilateral environmental agreements. Both of these could have a positive impact on the energy sector. Having said that, the WTO's contribution to sustainable development would only be effective if it is made part of a broader effort by more specialized international institutions, such as UNEP, for instance, towards this goal. In environmental goods and services, negotiators are seeking to liberalize trade in the kinds of products and services that could either prevent or limit pollution or contribute to environmental cleanup. In addition, some WTO members would like to include products that are superior to others in terms of their environmental performance, for instance, in their energy efficiency. And examples of the environmental goods that have been proposed are wind turbines, for instance, solar panels, geothermal energy sensors, fuel cells, and electricity meters. Lowering barriers to trade in renewable energy could reduce its price, making it a more viable alternative to the more polluting fuels. On the side of services, environmental services such as consultancy services have also featured in some of the services offers that WTO members have tabled. And such consultancy services in the energy sector could help countries boost their energy efficiency. And once again, I would like to encourage WTO members, most of which are participants at your session, developed and developing alike, to pursue these negotiations more forcefully because of their important environmental dimension. In many of the developing countries that have experienced a strong economic growth in the past few years, emissions have also risen in some instances by up to 75%. In the US, the EU and Japan, the transport sector has seen the fastest growth in greenhouse gas emissions, with emissions from international aviation growing far more rapidly than other transport sectors. Greater access to environmental goods and services can help combat these emissions, which, as I said, pose both health and an environmental challenge to all of us. In the World Trade Organization multilateral environmental agreements negotiations, which is the other side we're working on, WTO members are discussing ways to ensure the harmonious coexistence between trade rules and the various environmental agreements that have been negotiated to protect our environment. And it is undoubted that greater coherence between different bodies of international law, and in particular between the trade and environmental regimes, could lead to improved global governance. And I would also urge that these negotiations continue to go forward. Ladies and gentlemen, while energy is vital to economic growth, how we use energy is equally vital to our health and environmental well-being. There is no magic recipe for an ideal energy policy, one that would respond to all our needs. So we must simply continue labor and search for solutions, in part through the CSD and your own discussions. And we, on the trade side, so to say, are ready to contribute to that. I would wish you all the best of luck in your deliberation, and thank you for your attention.